I was driving home from town yesterday, windows down, radio playing something I wasn't really listening to, when I saw them up ahead. A pack of dogs in the middle of the main road, circling something on the pavement, playing with it the way kids play with a ball they found in the yard. I slowed down, leaned forward to see what had their attention, and my stomach dropped like a stone. A kitten. The dog that had been holding her just dropped her, right there in the middle of the road, like a toy it had gotten bored with. 2 cars ahead of me drove right over her. I watched in horror as her tiny body disappeared under their tires, somehow fitting in that impossible space between the wheels and the pavement. I gripped my steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. She had to be dead. Nothing that small survives something like that. But then she moved. Just a little twitch at first, barely noticeable. But it was there. This tiny, desperate flutter of life that somehow survived dogs and 2 tons of metal passing inches over her fragile body. I didn't think. Just pulled over hard, threw the car in park and jumped out. The dogs turned to look at me, and I braced myself for aggression, for having to fight them off. But they just stood there with their tails wagging, tongues hanging out, collars jingling. They looked at me like I'd come to join their game, like this was all just fun and I was a new playmate. "No," I told them, my voice shaking. "You can't have this." I scooped her up from the pavement as gently as I could, terrified I'd hurt her more than she already was. She was so warm in my hands, her tiny chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow breaths, covered in dirt and dog saliva, but alive. Impossibly, miraculously alive. I got back to the car and sat there for a moment, just holding her, trying to process what had just happened. My hands were trembling. And that's when she thanked me for saving her life, by pooping directly into my palms. I called my wife. Couldn't keep my voice steady. "I'm bringing something home," I managed. "I need you to be ready." She heard it in my voice, knew something was wrong. "What happened?" she asked, already shifting into the mode I'd need her in. "Just be ready." When I burst through our door holding this tiny, battered creature, my wife took one look at both of us, me shaking, the kitten barely moving, and immediately switched into what I call her mother mode. Her face went calm, focused, professional. Everything I wasn't in that moment. "What happened?" she asked, already reaching for the kitten, already assessing. "Dogs," I said, the word tumbling out. "On the road. They had her like a toy. 2 cars drove right over her. I thought..." My voice cracked. I thought she was dead. But she moved. Just barely, but she moved. My wife was already checking the kitten over, running gentle hands along tiny limbs, feeling for breaks, looking for wounds, assessing for shock. I just stood there feeling useless, watching her work. "The dogs," I continued, needing to explain. "They weren't mean. They had collars on. They were just playing. They didn't know. I told them no and got her to the car and she..." I looked down at my hands, still stained. "She pooped on me." My wife didn't laugh. She was too focused, too deep in examination mode. But I saw the corner of her mouth twitch just slightly. "We've told the cat distribution system we're done. We've said it multiple times, meant it every time. We have 3 cats already. Our hands are full, our budget is tight, our hearts are spoken for. We've fostered dozens of animals over the years, rehomed most of them, learned to say no to those pleading eyes and tiny mews. We got good at it. We had to. But the cat distribution system doesn't listen to what we think we want. It doesn't care about our plans or our protests. It has this way of dropping exactly the right soul into your path at exactly the right moment, making it impossible to say no. It's ruthless in its efficiency, relentless in its mission. And yesterday, it outdid itself. Because how do you say no to a kitten that survived dogs and cars? How do you drive away from something that fought that hard to stay alive? How do you ignore a miracle that poops in your hands? You don't. You can't. My wife started washing the kitten with a warm cloth, her movements so gentle I could barely see her hands moving. "Go check the area," she said without looking up. "There might be siblings, might be a mother." I went back out, drove around the area for 20 minutes, checking bushes and ditches, calling out softly, looking for any sign of other kittens or a mama cat. Nothing. Just empty road and silent fields. This one baby, alone in the world, chosen by some cosmic lottery to be in exactly the wrong place at exactly the wrong time, or maybe exactly the right place. Because I happened to be driving by, happened to look, happened to see that tiny movement. When I got back home, my wife had the kitten set up in a carrier with one of our heated blankets on low, creating a warm nest since there was no mother or siblings to provide body heat. She'd already mixed formula, already had a bottle ready. Years of fostering had taught us to keep supplies on hand, and thank God for that foresight because this tiny creature needed everything we had. The kitten was drinking when I walked in, latched onto the bottle like it was the only thing tethering her to life. Her tiny paws kneaded the air, eyes squeezed shut in concentration, and I could hear these little gulping sounds that somehow made my chest ache. About 20 to 25 milliliters, my wife said, watching the bottle. Roughly 1.5 tablespoons, not much, but good for someone this size. I looked at this impossibly tiny thing in my wife's hands, and something in my chest tightened. She was so small, so fragile. How was she even alive? By size alone, she looks maybe 4 to 6 weeks old, my wife continued, her voice taking on that clinical tone she uses when she's worried and trying not to show it. But her eyes aren't baby blue anymore, which means she's probably closer to 7 or 8 weeks. She's malnourished, severely underweight for her age. My wife checked her over thoroughly after the feeding, running gentle fingers through matted fur, looking for the usual culprits. No fleas, she murmured. No ear mites that I can see. Worms are still to be determined, but no obvious signs. That's something at least. But even as she said it, I could see the worry lines deepening around her eyes. The kitten wasn't moving right. When she tried to walk, her limbs didn't cooperate the way they should. She flailed, dragged herself forward, collapsed in frustration. Could be a concussion, my wife said quietly, and I heard all the other possibilities she wasn't saying out loud. Broken bones, spinal injury, nerve damage, torn ligaments, internal bleeding. The list of things that could be wrong was terrifying in its length. No visible bleeding, she continued, checking the kitten's gums. Pink, not gray. That's good. Gray gums can indicate internal bleeding. Her urine is clear, but she hasn't had a bowel movement since. She glanced at me with that tiny smile again. Since your car. Maybe she just prefers me, I said, trying to lighten the mood, trying to push back against the weight of worry settling over both of us. Maybe she's saving it for when I get home from work. That first night was brutal in ways I hadn't anticipated. My wife set alarms for every 3 to 4 hours, the feeding schedule for a kitten this young, and I woke up with her every single time. We'd stumble out of bed in the dark, both of us moving like zombies, and I'd hold this impossibly tiny creature in my palms while my wife mixed formula with hands that shook from exhaustion. We'd sit there in the dim light of the bedroom, both of us silent except for whispered prayers and encouragements to the kitten, watching her struggle to latch on and swallow, terrified that at any moment she might just stop. But she didn't stop. Every feeding she fought, latched on with surprising strength, swallowed determinedly, fell asleep with a full belly cradled against warmth and safety. She was a fighter, this tiny scrap of fur and bone. She refused to give up. By morning, we were absolutely wrecked, exhausted in that bone-deep way that comes from broken sleep and constant worry. But we were hopeful, cautiously, carefully hopeful. And this morning, not even 24 hours after I'd pulled her from that road, the change was nothing short of miraculous. She was calmer, more alert, more present. She started making sounds, little mews and chirps that grew louder when she heard our other cats meowing through the bedroom door. My wife thinks she's missing her family, calling out for siblings and a mother who aren't there to answer. She even hissed at us when we surprised her, this tiny, fierce sound that was more adorable than threatening. And she wanted to explore, fought against my wife's attempts to keep her still and resting. She wanted to move, to investigate, to live. She's so much better, my wife said, and I could hear the wonder in her voice, just worlds better than yesterday. But even as we marveled at her improvement, we knew we weren't out of the woods, not even close. Her front left paw was our biggest concern. She could put weight on it, which was encouraging, but when she tried to move, it folded at the wrist, just collapsed under her like it wasn't connected properly. My wife looked it up, read through veterinary sites while I held the kitten, and the possibilities were all serious. Could be a sprain, could be a break in the bone or joint, could be a torn ligament. Each injury was different, each required different treatment, and we had no way of knowing which it was without x-rays. My wife wrapped the paw in a stiff bandage, creating a makeshift splint, and the difference was immediate. With the support, the kitten could walk almost normally. She seemed so much more comfortable, so much more confident in her movements. But we both knew this was just a temporary solution, a band-aid on a wound that needed stitches. "We need x-rays," my wife said, and I heard all the weight behind those words. The kitten's chin was worrying too. Yesterday there'd been slight swelling on one side, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. This morning both sides were swollen, puffy, and tender to the touch. She still ate well, which was good, but my wife's face was tight with concern. "Swelling that gets worse usually means something more serious is going on," she said. "And animals are so good at hiding pain. She could be suffering more than we can see, more than she's letting on. We really need those x-rays to know what we're dealing with." I started making calls while my wife handled the morning feeding. Called every vet clinic within an hour's drive, asked about emergency appointments, asked about prices, and every conversation ended the same way, with numbers that made my stomach clench. Urgent care for pets is expensive, brutally so. Even the most affordable place I could find wanted several $100s just for x-rays and examination, not including whatever treatment would be needed after. Money we didn't just have sitting in our account waiting for emergencies. I also reached out to a local emergency assistance program that helps with vet bills, sent emails explaining the situation, pleading our case. But I knew the chances were slim. These programs are overwhelmed, underfunded, drowning in requests from people in situations just like ours, or worse. "If we don't hear back by this evening, we're going tomorrow anyway," my wife said firmly. "The soonest appointment I could get is tomorrow afternoon. We can't wait longer than that. Breaks and fractures can heal wrong if they're not treated quickly enough." She was right. I knew she was right. This kitten deserved proper care, deserved every chance we could give her. We'd figure out the money somehow. Between feedings, my wife gave the kitten warm cloth baths, wiping her down gently, cleaning away the grime from her ordeal. And every single time that tiny creature would purr, this rumbling, rattling sound that seemed impossibly loud coming from something so small. It was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard, proof that despite everything, despite the pain and fear and trauma, she still had the capacity for contentment. "We've fostered a lot of animals over the years," my wife said during one of these bath times, her voice quiet and thoughtful. "But I've never had one this small with injuries this serious. Never had the stakes feel quite this high." I hadn't either. I'd helped with plenty of rescues, held plenty of fragile creatures, worried over plenty of uncertain outcomes. But this felt different somehow. More desperate, more uncertain, more like we were racing against time with no idea if we were fast enough. I knew our local animal shelter wasn't an option, even though it was the closest and cheapest place to get help. My wife had called them before about another difficult case, and they'd been honest with her in a way that was both admirable and heartbreaking. Animals that need extensive care, longer recovery times, complicated treatments, they usually don't make it out of there alive. Not because the shelter workers are cruel or don't care. They do. But they don't have the resources, don't have the space, don't have the staff to handle cases that require round-the-clock attention for weeks or months. They'd take one look at this kitten, the injured paw, the swollen jaw, the malnourishment, the uncertain prognosis, and they'd make the practical decision. The merciful decision, they'd call it. And maybe they'd be right. Maybe it would be merciful compared to prolonged suffering. But I couldn't accept that. Not for this one. Not for the fighter who survived dogs and cars and pooped in my hands as a thank you. The nearest no-kill shelter was farther away, and I'd already called them earlier. They had a strict policy, only accept animals from within their service area, which they verify with ID. We're just outside their boundary, close enough to see their facility from certain roads, but not close enough to qualify for their help. We were on our own with this one. This morning, my wife and I had a real conversation. Not the quick exchanges we'd been having between feedings and worry, but an actual sit-down talk about what we were getting into, about the money we'd have to spend, money we didn't really have but would find somehow, about the time commitment, the round-the-clock care that would continue for weeks, possibly months, about the uncertainty of it all. We didn't know if her leg would heal properly, didn't know what the x-rays would reveal, didn't know if there was hidden damage we couldn't see. We didn't know if our best would be enough. But sitting there, talking it through, we both knew we'd already made the choice. It was made the moment I pulled over on that road. Made when she pooped in my hands and I brought her home anyway. Made every time we set an alarm for 3 a.m. and stumbled out of bed to feed her. The choice was already made. We were just acknowledging it now. Last night, after one of the late feedings, I'd sat and watched her sleep in that carrier, curled up on the heated blanket, her tiny chest rising and falling with breaths that seemed too fragile to sustain life. She looked so impossibly small, so breakable, so unlikely to survive. But she had survived. Had survived dogs treating her like a toy, survived 2 cars driving over her, survived being dropped on pavement hard enough to injure but not hard enough to kill. She was a fighter. And fighters deserve people who fight alongside them. This morning she purred in my wife's hands during feeding time, looked up at her with total trust in those eyes. My wife glanced at me over the kitten's tiny head, and we didn't need to say anything. We both knew. We were in this now, completely and utterly committed. The cat distribution system had gotten us again, and we'd walked right into it with our eyes wide open. We'd told that system we were done, told it firmly and repeatedly that 3 cats was our limit, that we couldn't take on any more, that we'd learned our lesson about getting attached. We'd meant it too. We'd been so good about rehoming the strays that found us, about saying no to those big eyes and tiny mews. But the system doesn't care what we think we want or what limits we think we've set. It sees beyond our protests to something deeper, something we can't see ourselves. It has this uncanny ability to put exactly the right soul in exactly the right path at exactly the right moment, and then it sits back and watches us try to resist what's already inevitable. And it knew. Somehow it knew that this particular kitten needed to find us specifically. That she needed people who'd fostered before, who had supplies on hand, who knew how to care for injured babies. That she needed people stubborn enough to fight for her when others wouldn't, desperate enough to spend money they didn't have, soft enough to set alarms every 3 hours and stumble through feedings at 3 a.m. That she needed people who understood the value of a single small life, even when that life was broken and uncertain and expensive to save. The system put her directly in my path, made sure I was looking at exactly the right moment, made sure I saw that tiny movement that meant life instead of death. And then, just to make absolutely certain I couldn't back out, it made her poop in my hands. Because nothing bonds you to a creature quite like having it defecate on you within minutes of meeting. Tomorrow we'll take her to the vet, finally get those x-rays, find out exactly how bad the damage is. We'll hear words like fracture and ligament and prognosis. We'll have to make decisions about treatment options and payment plans. We don't know what they'll tell us. Don't know if her leg can be fully healed. Don't know what other injuries might be lurking beneath the surface, invisible to our amateur examinations. We're walking into that appointment blind, holding this tiny creature who's already claimed pieces of our hearts we didn't know we had left to give. But we know she's worth it. Worth every sleepless night we've already had and all the ones to come. Worth every dollar we'll have to scrape together. Worth every moment of worry and fear and desperate hope. Because she fought to survive when survival seemed impossible. She refused to give up when giving up would have been so much easier. The least we can do is refuse to give up on her. My wife is the expert in all this. She's the one who knows what to do, how to care for them, how to read the signs of improvement or decline. She's the one with steady hands and calm voice who can make frightened creatures feel safe. I'm just the guy who happened to be driving by at the right moment, the guy who couldn't ignore that tiny movement on the pavement, the guy who got pooped on and brought her home anyway. But now we're in this together. My wife with her expertise and steady calm, me with my stubborn refusal to accept the easy way out, and this tiny fighter who survived the impossible. We're a team now, bound together by chance and choice and the ruthless efficiency of a system that knows what we need better than we do ourselves. Cat distribution system, you win again. And you know what? We're not even mad about it anymore. Because she found us, or we found her, or maybe we found each other. And we're not going to let her down.